Hey there, Luke here, and welcome back to the How to Build Your Own Hydrofoil video series. If you're just catching up, you can find all of the videos, parts and accessories, and the plans on our website, flukeskitesurfing.com. And today we're going to be following on from yesterday's video where we put this sealer coat on our foil. So by now we've shaped up our wings out of wood, and now you can see I've actually sealed these with the epoxy resin, and that has gone nice and hard overnight. So basically it's been about 18 hours since I applied this sealer coat, and I think it looks pretty good. One thing I want to mention in yesterday's video is what I like to do is actually come back at about 30 minutes after painting or even laminating, whenever I use any resin really, and just double check that I don't have any drips forming. I didn't do that yesterday, and you can see on the bottom edge, you can see those drips. Now we're going to be sanding this anyway, and I'm going to be using the random orbital sander, so it's not a big deal today, but sometimes that can be really annoying if you have to sand when you wouldn't have otherwise had to. So I like to come back at about 30 minutes and just get the brush back under there, and just any areas that might have drips, just clean them up. And you can even do that at 30 minutes and an hour and 2 hours, and just keep checking on it if you really want to. But that said, I think they both look really good. So I'm really happy with the shapes and how they're looking. In today's video, what we're going to be focusing on is laminating the bottom. So we'll be putting the fiberglass on the bottom surface today. And before we do that, we're going to sand these up. I'll be sanding them with the random orbital and by hand up to about 120 grit. I think I'll probably just do the whole thing with 120, and then, as in, you don't need to start any coarser. So you could use 80 grit and then 120, but I think if you just sand it with 120, I find that's normally sufficient. You don't want to over sand it and burn through into the timber. Remember, we've put this sealer coat on. Some of it you'll see when I start sanding it, it does scuff it up, but what we're really trying to achieve is have a flat surface, so removing any drips or any lumps, and also scuffing up the surface, so removing any shiny, you can see how shiny it is at the moment, making everything look dull so that the next layer of resin will mechanically adhere to that. So the first step though is we're actually going to drill these holes with a bigger drill bit so that we can then fill them with some resin in the next step. So let's get started today, and like I said, the very first step will be drilling out these holes. Okay, so I'm just going to start by removing the screws that we have just supporting it. And then using a 12.5 millimeter drill bit, or half an inch, we're going to just simply re-drill through these 5 holes and the 2 holes on the small wing. So literally just drilling a hole all the way through, and then we'll be refilling that with some fiberglass powder, and some milled fiberglass, and also some resin. And what that will do is create a better seat for the screw. So it's simple enough though. We'll just literally drill straight through the same holes that we already made. Okay, so now we basically have these bigger holes drilled. They don't need to be absolutely perfect because they're all covered. So the top and the bottom are covered with a carbon fiber patch, so you never see it. But you do need to be pretty careful around this back trailing edge area just because of how thin it is. But that's what it should look like. And same with the small wing. And now we will sand it up. So we're starting to get there. You can see some of the difference between the shiny sections, hopefully that's catching in the light, and the sort of dulled sections. So what we want to do is remove any of these shiny sections. You can see this is sort of part of the build-up that was left on the front. Another reason, as I mentioned before, it's good to try and clean that up to reduce your sanding. But it's getting close. Same with the front wing. So the top's almost completely done. You can see it's almost completely dull except for a line along the trailing edge there where there was a bit of build-up. So even once you're sanding with the orbital sander, you definitely want to get all the shiny sections just roughed up. So you might just have to use sort of a hand, get your finger, make sure you're hitting all of those zones, just to make sure that the next layer of resin will stick. So I'll keep going, probably got another 15 minutes or so, and then we'll be ready to laminate the glass. Okay, so now we're ready to laminate the bottom. So the first step will be basically cutting out our fiberglass cloth so that it's a bit oversized. Then we'll tape it up so we don't have any drips everywhere. Then we'll mix up some resin, we'll screed it on with a squeegee, and then it's set, ready to dry. So I thought because this is our first fiberglassing in this video series, I'll just give you a bit of understanding about why we do this layup. So if we look at the previous version, this is what it's going to look like when we finish. So we'll have a carbon fiber patch with fiberglass that's basically reinforcing the wood. If you've seen many other foils, you know that most foils are just 100% carbon fiber. They use different production techniques such as using a mold and a press or vacuum bagging, but I wanted to make this series more accessible to the DIYer. You can do it at home and you can lay it up more like you'd lay up a surfboard by wrapping fiberglass over the rails. We have a couple of advantages with this particular design because we have a timber core. It's not going to suck in water like a foam core would. We're also going to wrap our fiberglass over the leading edge, which adds a really nice stiff wing. Like this wing, if I flex it, is very, very stiff. You might be wondering, is it going to be strong enough with the wood if it's not all carbon fiber? The answer is definitely yes. There's a lot of strength there. When Ryan was taking this version 2 out, he was jumping it and sliding it and slashing it, and it really held up against all of that, no problem at all. So I like this system because it's nice and easy and beginner friendly, this construction technique. But of course, I'm not trying to say it's better than the vacuum bagging. I mean, all of those methods are great, and that's why they're done in production. You get very, very high quality finishes, but we can get something that finishes really nicely like this, and like I said, it works just as well. So let's get started. So the very first step is we're going to be getting our fiberglass cloth. This cloth is 6-ounce e-glass, and that's what I use everywhere, so we don't need different weights. You just get the 6-ounce e-glass, and we also have some 6-ounce carbon fiber. The 6-ounce carbon fiber, you'll see, is quite a lot stiffer and thicker than the 6-ounce e-glass. It's great if you can get these patches. If you can't get the carbon fiber patches, and you can check it out on our website, we might stock little kits as well. But if you can't get the carbon fiber patches, you can just replace it with more fiberglass. Whenever I say we're going to put a carbon fiber patch in, just simply double it and put 2 extra patches of fiberglass in its place, and the foil will still definitely work in that circumstance. So a couple of things that we're going to need. We're going to need some masking tape, a little silicone squeegee. These are really great for laminating. They're cheap as well, so you can find one of them. Of course, another mixing cup and the resin. So the first step is we're going to cut a couple of patches of fiberglass. So if we head over, I've got my shears here. What I like to do is just cut a little wider, so we're basically just oversize. I just cut a strip straight off the roll. And the layup, you can see that will sit on there. The layup for the bottom will actually be 2 full layers and 2 patches and 1 patch of carbon. So I'll just cut the second full layer. So what I like to do is actually cut the first 2 layers first before we put any of the patches on, before we put the masking tape on. If you're doing a surfboard, you would normally tape all of your lines first and then run your fiberglass, leave it in position and put it on. But I found that if I put all the tape and everything on first, the fiberglass starts getting stuck to it all and it makes it more difficult. So I like to lay out the 2 full sheets first, cut them to the approximate size that we need, and then actually cut my patches, like take them off, cut the patches. I'll show you exactly what I mean. Now, one thing is, with the bottom layer, we're only going to the very front edge of the leading edge, all the way around. We don't wrap the bottom, it's just flat. The trailing edge, we want to leave about 10 to 15 mils over the back. So I just go around. It doesn't matter if you cut it slightly big, because we can sand it off. But just try and cut it nice and close and straight off the back. And you can put something heavy on there so it doesn't move around too much. So the scissors are just sort of rubbing against the wing there, just as a guide. Okay, and then what I like to do is just slide that back ever so slightly, because everything that's in front of this we're going to sand off. So if you can get it to right along the front edge like that, I find that that is just perfect. Like I mentioned, we're going to be actually wrapping the fiberglass over from the leading edge, so it adds a lot of strength as it goes over the top there. Okay, I'll just turn it around, and then like I mentioned, we just want to leave about 10 millimeters overhang. The foil finishes, if we just have a look here, with about 3 millimeters overhang. You can see the clear line. But we want to sand that back, so you just want to leave enough that we can do that. Doesn't matter if it's a bit more, to be honest. So what I'm doing here is I can feel it with my thumb on the edge, and so I know that where I am. Okay, so now I've got this cut to a size that is just slightly oversized of the wood, and so what I do is just fold it up gently and then just look for somewhere nice, and you don't want to kink it, just somewhere nice and clean just to rest that for the moment. Alright, so now that we've cut these extra pieces, you can see you'll have so probably if you've cut it off a roll like I have, you end up with some patches. So if you've got any big enough, we can use that. I don't actually have any big enough there, but I've got some from a previous version. So what we want to do now is just cut 2 patches that will run from the front to back, and what I like to do is actually start with a smaller one and you make each one bigger. And what that will do is that when you sand it afterwards, imagine it starts to create a mound. If the first one's smaller and it goes like that, it's a gradual slope, so it sands smoother. So the first one, we just cut it oversized to start with. And you don't want it to go over the leading edge, but you do want it to come over the trailing edge. So what I'll do is just cut that little bit of the edge off. And so this first one I'm going to cut, it'll be about 60 millimeters. And these are just reinforcing strips for the connection point where all the screws attach to the fuselage to basically stiffen that area up. So I'm just going to cut that off straight. Sit that right in the center like that. And then I'll just trim the back off like that. Okay. Good. So then the next one, we're going to do exactly the same thing, but this one will be just slightly wider. So this one will cut to about 70 millimeters or 80 even. Okay, like that. Put that down there, and you can see that what it's just slightly bigger, like that, so that when it goes over the edge, it'll create a nice smooth sanding surface. Okay, like that. And then a piece of carbon. And the piece of carbon, it can be any size really. I mean, you could have a wider patch, a smaller patch. Really, it's just to reinforce that connection point. But if you want it to look different, you can definitely play around with the different size, however you want to do it. So it's not quite wide enough, so I'm going to have to cut it off here. And one of the sort of design features, I guess, of this foil is it's kind of like a hand cut carbon. You can kind of see it's a bit rough, so I actually like that look. So you could try and cut it perfectly neat if you want, but for me, I just cut it roughly. And then cut it to length. Carbon's a bit harder to sand, so I don't take it all the way to the leading edge, just hold it back just slightly, and I'm going to go about that wide for this one. So cut it something like that, and that will sit on there. You'll see the weave, so you can see as you manipulate or stretch it, you can change the look. So I'm going to make it square how it's meant to be, so doesn't look on an angle, and then you can lay it down right in the middle. And I just eyeball that up into position. So now that we've got that ready, we actually lay it up in sections. So I'll show you in a moment, but I'm just going to put them to the side for the moment, and then we'll lay it all up. Okay, so now we're going to repeat the process for the small wing, except the small wing, we only use one layer of fiberglass, full layer, one layer of 6-ounce patch, and one layer of 6-ounce carbon fiber. So it's got a lot less. It's so much smaller, it really doesn't need that extra reinforcement. So another way you can do it is actually, you might find this easier or not, is just have it overhanging slightly at the back. So you've got your 10 mil over the back already, and then you can just go and cut the front without it moving. Okay, so now I've got all the patches and the fiberglass cut out. So we've got one full piece for the small wing, plus one patch of fiberglass, plus one patch of carbon, and two full sheets for the big wing, plus two patches of fiberglass and one patch of carbon. They're all just sitting over here neatly, ready. And so the next step is to tape up. So we're going to use masking tape. on the top essentially of the wing, so that any drips while we're laminating, if they come over, they don't stick to this surface and then we have to sand them. So it just makes it a bit neater for the next stage. So basically the way I like to do it is I actually run one full tape that hangs over the back. So it actually is hanging over the back edge. And what that will do is when we just get that off there. Let's stick that on, I'll show you. When we put the fiberglass on here next, any resin that actually falls through just gets caught on top of this instead of letting it run around. I find that helps actually backfill it as well. So that's the first step. And then this sort of more difficult step is to go all the way around the leading edge neatly so that it has a drip line. And you're just sort of trying to keep it on about halfway on that leading edge there. Something like that. And we can go all the way around both of them. Just okay, so now we've got the bottom tape, well it's the top of the foil but taped up so the laminating, you can see any resin will come and drip off that edge. So we'll put these in position, just push back the tape just so it doesn't, you don't want it folding up like that and holding the fiberglass up. So you just push that tape down. Same with this one. And we are ready to laminate. Okay, so now we're ready to mix up the resin. Gloves on, of course. And for this mix, I'm mixing 75 grams of resin. You can choose to mix more if this is new. Sometimes it's nice to have excess. What you can't do is get halfway through it and mix a bit more in. So you can't do that with resin. So you always want to have more so you can definitely finish your job rather than have less. But for me, I'm going to go with the 75 grams, which means 50 grams of part A and 25 grams of part B. Mix it up for 2 minutes and then we're ready to put it on. Okay, I think that is all mixed up. So what I like to do is do this in 2 parts because there's a few too many layers to lay it all, I find anyway, to have it soak through. So what I like to do is take the patches of fiberglass and we actually put them down in position, dry, and over the back like that, and you can see you're just lining it up on the holes. Then the next one centered over the top of that, even at the front like that, and then just drizzle a little bit of resin on there, and what that will do is just start to help it stick. So you can grab the squeegee and very gentle pressure because this will just slide around until it's actually soaked through. So I'm not actually pushing down on that, that's just floating, the squeegee's just floating on top. And you can see as it starts to saturate, it goes see-through. And all we're doing, I think probably the biggest reason to do this is so that when we lay the carbon on top of this and then 2 more layers of fiberglass and we put resin over it, we don't have to rely on the resin seeping through all of those layers of fiberglass plus the carbon. So we put the 2 on the patches here, just with a small amount of resin. I think one of the traps for people when they're learning to laminate is putting too much resin. And so if you put too much resin, particularly underneath here, and then put all the layers on top, then what you'll find is it's very hard to get all that resin out. So you just enough there just to let that soak. With epoxy resins, if you're not familiar with it, you don't have to work the resin through it, you just let it soak through. So now that it's saturating, that will actually be, that will be strong, but what we do is we use the squeegee at the end to actually get the excess resin out so it's not overly heavy. Okay, so now that that's transparent, we can put the carbon patch on right in the middle like that and just sit it down. That will kind of stick because of the resin underneath it, and we're going to neatly put the 2 layers of fiberglass over the top of it. So you need to sort of eye this up the best you can. Remember, we're pretty much flush at the front, so it's reasonably easy, like that, and just very gently. You don't want to pull all the fibers around. Just forward a little bit with that, and that looks pretty good. Okay, so now it's in position. This is actually how you'd normally lay up. You'd have your cloth down first, you'd run some resin around, and then actually use the squeegee to move that resin and let it saturate. But that first step I just find is easier, especially with these little pieces like this, just to let all that, to have that first bit of resin underneath before we do this step. So again, we're just pushing that resin around. There's no real pressure on it. It's just to get it to saturate everywhere. Then we'll have to actually pull the excess out in a moment. So make sure it gets all the way to the edges. Just needs a little more at the back there. Okay. So while this is soaking, again, this will be temperature dependent, but you got to check that it's not going off. If it's 30 degrees, this is going to go off pretty quickly, as in within half an hour. But in this temperature right now, I've got a couple of hours working time. So while that's soaking in, I'm going to do exactly the same thing for the small wing. So we'll just put a little drizzle. What am I doing? Put the fiberglass down first. It's okay though. And then we're doing a reverse soak here. Okay. So that's saturated. And then carbon patch on top of that. Right in the middle. Like that.
You don't backfill the holes?
No, I don't. We backfill the holes in the next step. And then we're going to put this right in the right position. So just rest it in the right spot. And again, pour a bit of the resin. This helps set it in position, and then we spread it around and let it soak in. Alright, so we're letting that one soak in, and while that's soaking, we'll actually start to move some of this. You can see, while it's in this state, you can see this air bubble here. That's a sign that's actually too much resin underneath that. It will bubble up like that. Or it could be a sign that it's too dry. So what we do is, with a very sort of moderate pressure, I would call it, but you don't want to push too hard. You can start to push down on an angle. So you're holding the squeegee on a sort of a 45-degree angle and going along. It's better to move towards the wingtips and not actually, so don't start here and try and pull in. If you do that, it will bunch up. So you're moving out towards the wingtips. You can support it by just putting your hand underneath the foil and then clear the excess off onto a cup. You can see the excess that comes off on it. So you can removing that. Rule of thumb is, if you're only using sort of light to moderate pressure and there's excess at all coming off on the squeegee, you have too much resin still in the fiberglass. And there's a bit of a zipper sound. We can't quite hear it yet, but you can start to hear it. That zipper sound as it runs across the cloth. You can hear those air bubbles there. So you want to make sure all of that's out. You can just wet out any small dry areas. Don't want any dry cloth either. But you can see now, hear that? That's the sound we're looking for, and you can see it's coming off reasonably clear, as in there's not much build up on the squeegee. At the same time, you don't want it to look too dry. If it gets too dry, you'll start to see this white checker pattern that you've taken too much resin out. So this is about the amount of resin that you want. Another guide is to look down, and when you look really close, that it doesn't have shiny patches. You don't want any pooling of resin. You should be able to see the texture of the cloth. And so that's actually looking pretty good there now. You don't want to overwork it either. It takes a little bit of practice sometimes just with the fiberglass. So I'll just do the same to this one. This is a bit harder. The small wing can be a little fiddly because you can accidentally pull all the cloth around just by applying any pressure at all. So you just have to be really gentle with the small wing. There's not much surface area there. But you can see how shiny that is. I'm not sure if you can see that in the light, but it's quite shiny there at the moment. So we're trying to take a lot of that shine out, because at the moment it definitely has too much resin in it. But you need to have a little extra resin in while you're doing it so that it saturates, soaks in, make sure you've got a really good bond, and then you're just pulling it out with this squeegee. Okay, that's looking pretty good, I think. If you have a little oversaturated the cloth, like if you leave it a little too much resin in it, it's not the end of the world. It just makes it slightly heavier, and you have to sand it before you can do the next coat. But I'll be sanding this lightly anyway before we do the next coat, which you'll see in the next steps. So just do your best. You don't want big puddles, you don't want drips everywhere, and you don't want it to be too dry. So it's sort of finding that right in between. But as you can see, that looks pretty good now. Another step forward for building your hydrofoil. So congratulations if you are following along and you're at this stage now. So that will add some real strength to the wood already. And you can see that it's laying right against the masking tape at the bottom, so that sort of supports it. You don't want it folding up, so make sure you have pushed that down, that it's not actually holding the back edge up. But other than that, it makes it easy. We pull the tape off the other side, and we'll be doing that in the step tomorrow. So just like every step, we have to wait for this now to dry. So at this time tomorrow, I'll come back up and we'll peel the tape off, sand it up a little bit, and we can do the next step. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll hope that helped. Anyway, I hope you're following along and you are at this stage. That would be really exciting, and I'll see you in the next video.